Hey there, listeners. This is Justin with a quick note before today's episode. We're going to be hosting a live seminar. It's going to be held by video on June 19th. That's Wednesday, June 19th. It'll be 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be 90 minutes. This first seminar is hosted by Amgen. We're going to have 3 different team members with 3 different roles, with 3 different backgrounds, all veterans on the live panel. And just like on the show, I'm going to do 45 minutes of Q&A with the 3 of them. And then we're going to take 45 minutes and open it up to the audience to answer any and all questions that you have. If you have any interest whatsoever about Amgen, about the biotech and medical services industry, about functional roles that are universal across every industry, I'd really encourage you to join. I would love to see you there, add some faces to some names, and have your participation. I think you're going to learn a lot, and we're very, very excited to kick this off. And also very grateful for Amgen's support, because by sponsoring this panel, they're helping us expand our work over here at Beyond the Uniform. And all of this is 100% free for you to join. So costs nothing. You can register through our newsletter or look for a link on the site. Hope to see you there. Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and my goal is to help military veterans thrive in their civilian career. Today is episode number 273 with Lida, Citreon.
Everyone has a brand by design or by default. Each of us has a reputation because people feel something about us. So I think the reason I have leaned so heavily into helping the military community is because it is so empowering, and it's a tool and a strategy and approach that civilians are using to advance our companies, to advance our personal gain in our reputation and careers, that somebody who's not familiar with it is going to be at a disadvantage. And my job is to make sure that everybody has the same tools, and especially our men and women who've worn the uniform and ensured my freedom, for which I'm very grateful.
Well, while not a veteran herself, Lida is an expert in personal branding. In addition to her work with top executives, she has helped countless members of the military and veterans as well. In this interview, we talk about your brand, which, whether you realize it or not, you've got one, what a brand is, why it's important, and how to take steps towards improving your brand. We talk about defining your legacy and how you can use your personal brand as a filter in your life, a filter for what you say yes to and a filter for what you say no to. We talk about the strategy and tactics for helping in your job search and more. Special note, Lida's got some incredible courses on LinkedIn, some specifically targeted at veterans, completely free. So I'd encourage you to check out the show notes at beyondtheuniform.org to check out those videos. Special thanks for an Apple Podcasts and review from Dan Samo back in September 2018. He said, or she said, Justin has done a fantastic job with this podcast. Every episode is an absolute goldmine of information for all. Even if you are years away from your transition date, listening in is a must. He even takes notes for you. Well done, Justin. Thank you so much for that positive review on iTunes and for all of those who have left positive Apple Podcast reviews. So with that, let's dive in to my conversation with Lida. Well, joining me today, very close to where I'm at over in Greenwood Village, Colorado, is Lida Citreon. Lida, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to share this information with your audience.
And for listeners, I want to give listeners a very abbreviated background on Lida. She does personal branding for executives, corporate brand consulting. She's a speaker, author, reputation management. She does all of this at her company, Lida 360, which she's run for over 10 years. She is the author of the book, Your Next Mission, which if video viewers had video right now, they'd see me holding a copy of her book. And her book is called Your Next Mission, a personal branding guide for military to civilian transition. She has top-notch video courses on LinkedIn for veterans. I'm going to have have links to all of those in the show notes. And she's been featured in a lot of great publications: MSNBC, the UK Guardian, Fortune, Huffington Post, Entrepreneur, Hire in America, Forbes.com, Harvard Business Review, CBS Money Watch, US News and World Report, and others. She has spent over 20 years in corporate branding and marketing. And as a quick aside, Lida and I were able to grab lunch a week ago. We delved into all sorts of things. She's a wealth of knowledge, and so very, very excited to have her on the show today. And special thanks to Dwayne Francis for connecting us for the interview today. So, Lida, maybe to start things off, if you bumped into someone who is serving on active duty or who's a military veteran, and they said, "What do you do for a living?" how would you explain your work?
Well, thank you for that. And just as a side note, thank you, Justin. When we had lunch, I got to know a brand new sushi place, which I'm really excited about, maybe going back this weekend. So thank you for that. It's interesting when I describe what I do is I help people tell their story in more meaningful ways, right? But that sounds a little fluffy. So to break that down, somebody comes to me for one of three reasons. Either they want to build their brand, they have a reputation, but nobody really knows what that is, or they haven't been intentional about how they position themselves with target audiences. Or the second case is they need to pivot, or they are wanting to pivot. So they wake up one morning and decide, I don't want to be doing that anymore. I want to be over here, but I need to take all the equity of my brand and reputation with me. And then the third category of somebody who finds me is when there's a problem and they need to repair their reputation. Maybe it was an ill-fated tweet. Maybe they said something in front of shareholders. Maybe they said something in front of a media outlet. But they need to fix the perception, which is now negative, of who they are. And that's where I earn my living. And I take those same skills and talents, if you will, and I apply them to veterans who are transitioning out of uniform, who again may need to build a brand for themselves, pivot their brand from what they did in the military to civilian, or in some cases, maybe the news isn't so great and they need to fix their reputation and brand.
That's great. And I think that for listeners, you're probably used to thinking of Apple or iPhone as a brand or product. It has its own reputation. It has its own brand attributes. Maybe for Apple, you think of design or quirky or technology first. Like every brand has a specific identity. And what I love about what Lida's talking about is you have that too, whether you realize it or not. You have a brand. People think of you in a certain way. Maybe you're the funny, witty person. Maybe you're the calm, collected person. Like they think of you and they think of different things. And what I love, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Lida, what I love about your work, it's almost this proactive aspect of taking a little bit more ownership of that narrative and doing the heavy lifting of thinking of like, what are my values? And am I living in a way, am I operating in a way that communicates that? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, that's beautifully said. Because there's a line that I'm often quoted for, which says, "Everyone has a brand by design or by default." Each of us has a reputation because people feel something about us. And to back it up even further, a brand isn't a swoosh or a color palette or an apple. It's a feeling. A brand is a feeling. It makes us believe something, and that belief is based in feelings. Over time, as people experience Apple, for instance, if they believe that Apple product is going to be innovative and cutting edge and give them self-esteem around their friends, as long as that's confirmed, then that feeling is solidified. If it's not confirmed, if it was hype or, it fell short, that belief becomes changed. And when we look at people, those same processes and methodology and ideas apply, right? Justin, you have a certain brand that makes people feel a certain way when they get an email from you, or they go to your podcast, or they interact with you in your day job, so to speak. And if that belief is not confirmed, right? If you aren't the person I thought you were going to be, then I may or may not want to continue to engage with you. And that's how branding applies to companies, products, services, and people.
I love that too, because one thing that comes to mind when you're saying that is that, like for me, a phrase that I like is alignment, like living a life aligned with who I am, the bedrock of who I am. And I love what I perceive is what you're doing is like it's helping people take the time to figure out who do they want to be in the world. But I think the fringe benefit of that is you can correct the things that don't align with that. Like, hey, your brand really seems to be about honesty, and these things that you're doing, these behaviors that are exhibiting, are contrary to that. So if this is really the direction you want to go and the person you want to be, let's figure out a way to modify these behaviors or to get this more in alignment with who you actually want to be. That's very powerful.
Well, and it also begs the question, are you sure that's who you want to be? Because sometimes our behaviors show a side of ourselves that is more truthful than what we tell people. So you're absolutely right. It's about bringing all of it into alignment. And that gives somebody a sense of control that perhaps they've never experienced. And when I spread that message in the military community, I'm speaking a foreign language. As you know, having served, it's not a culture that necessarily infuses a lot of independent thinking and self-promotion and being in control of your future in the way that civilians are used to. So I'm introducing a topic that is definitely going to be uncomfortable for the men and women sitting in my audiences.
And that's something I hadn't thought of either, is the thought of, I'll just speak from my own experience. When I entered the Naval Academy, when I was in the Navy, at least it seems like a lot of my brand was given to me. I'm given a uniform, I'm given values, I'm given an oath. And of course, I chose to accept these things, but there wasn't a lot of thought that I had to give. Once I decided I was going to be in the military, a lot of that brand was defined by someone else. And I love what you're talking about, is this proactive aspect of someone being able to take control of that brand and be able to say, this is who I am and what I believe in. And I can imagine that's a pretty big undertaking to do that.
Well, imagine, the day came when you took the uniform off, right? And as I talk about in my TED Talk, that's a huge day. And as much as you might think you're prepared for it because you've completed your capstone, you've gone through TAP, you've got, maybe a job and a house and things like that set up, there's an emotional shift that happens because you go from being Lieutenant Colonel John Smith, United States Air Force, to being John Smith, job applicant in some cases, or just being on the other side of that, of that natural reputation. And now how are you going to define yourself? So I think the reason I have leaned so heavily into helping the military community is because it is so empowering. And it's a tool and a strategy and approach that civilians are using to advance our companies, to advance our personal gain in our reputation and careers, that somebody who's not familiar with it is going to be at a disadvantage. And my job is to make sure that everybody has the same tools, and especially our men and women who've worn the uniform and ensured my freedom, for which I'm very grateful.
That's great. And I just want to point out for listeners, the skill that Lida has cultivated over decades, it's an extremely high demand in corporate America. And I just want to point out that it's really awesome to see someone with her background and credentials and experience. Of course, she's using that to make a living, but she has carved out time to give back and to help people in the military. And I can speak for her that she would not, she has more than enough on her plate. If she was just doing her full-time job, she has more than enough work there. So it really is carving out time to speak to the podcast, to put these videos together for LinkedIn, to do this work at the Air Force Academy. Like, she does so many things giving back. And I just want to name that for listeners. And one thing that I want to ask about is, you have coached multi-star generals, you've coached countless veterans. I'm curious if there's any trends that you've seen with these people, any mistakes that they make when making that transition, or any consistencies that you've seen that listeners might benefit from hearing.
Certainly. And these are mistakes or challenges or obstacles that have been shared with me. And I've coached thousands at this point of military, either veterans or service members in transition. And I think the first is understanding or not understanding that there's a fundamental difference in how we talk about ourselves, right? So you and I chatted about this at lunch. As a civilian, I have no trouble telling you what I've done that I'm proud of, my accomplishments, my successes, awards, decorations, everything. I can list my resume frontwards and backwards with complete confidence and making eye contact. For someone coming out of uniform, that's going to feel very unnatural, right? There's a difference between I versus we. And the military culture teaches service before self. It teaches you to take responsibility and accountability, but not credit and recognition. So that challenge presents itself if you were to sit in front of a hiring manager who says, Justin, sell me on you. And you say, well, when I was in service, we did this. When I was in uniform, my squad, my platoon, my company, we did these things, and I'm really proud of them. And that hiring manager is going, why isn't he talking about himself? Why is he using third person? Is he insecure? Is he unsure? What's going on here? Because if you look at the numbers, right, 1 to 1.5% of the American population has served in uniform. So that means 99% haven't. And that hiring manager, unless they are very well skilled on understanding military speak, is going to have questions around, why aren't you saying I? So fundamentally, that's a big difference. And as soon as I say that, I usually see a lot of heads nodding in the audience. The second concept that presents itself as a challenge, again, to me, I see as an opportunity, is the concept of choice. So every month that I teach in the Air Force Academy's TAP program, they have just done an exercise. The class has just done an exercise before I walk in. And the exercise asks them to list out, what are you most excited about in your transition? And what are you most anxious about in your transition? Every single month, one theme shows up on that sheet. I take a picture of it every single month. I have years of these pictures. But what are you most excited about in transitioning out of the military? Folks will say, I'm excited about choosing what I wear, choosing what time I get up in the morning, choosing whatever job I want to have. Great. What are you most anxious about? I don't know what time to get up. I don't know what I'm supposed to wear. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So this concept of choice, which to a civilian is power, right? I want as much choice over my future as I can have, can be debilitating to someone who has not lived or developed professionally in a culture of choice, right? Choice is more limited in the military than it is in the civilian. So that can present an opportunity to make mistakes, right? That's the person who grabs the first job that's offered to them, whether it's right or wrong. That's the person who doesn't know how to sell themselves because they're going to stay within one narrative and, come hell or high water, that's their narrative. Choice can be very different, and it can present obstacles. And I think the third.
Oh, let me just pause you there real quickly because I just want to tease some things out because this is just a wealth of information. So the first thing, I love that thought of I versus we. And when Lida and I grabbed lunch, one of the trends in the 270-ish interviews I've done is how difficult members of the military have advocating for themselves, speaking in terms of I. And I just want to give a quick framework for listeners to consider, at least, is, when I was on active duty, and let's say I'm a lieutenant, I'm an 03, when I was taught, when I had midshipmen come on board, I explained our nuclear reactor in very different terms than I explained it when I was talking to a captain or an 06, right? It's just very different. It's knowing your audience and communicating to them in a way that actually makes sense to them. And I just throw that out because I know a lot of people I've spoken with have difficulty. Like, they feel like if they change the way they talk in an interview, they're not being authentic. They're not having integrity. They're not being themselves. And I would just propose, take that on as like, hey, the hiring manager needs you. You need to spoon feed to them in terms that they understand. And that means saying I, taking responsibility for your accomplishments. That's not misrepresenting yourself. It's just communicating in a way that's going to land with your audience, and in that case, a hiring manager. And then the second thing is, I love that thought. It's so wild to think in that survey that what most excites people is also what most scares them. It's the other side of the coin. It's that paradox of choice of having excitement about being able to make so many decisions and then realizing there's 100,000 different job types out there. How on earth do you figure out what they are? And so I love that you're communicating that piece about that. So I'm excited to hear the third one, but I just wanted to kind of give a quick aside for listeners.
Well, and now the third one's actually going to probably be a couple. So there's my math skills for you. I think it's recognizing that things are going to be different. right? I think there's this sense of confidence, and I don't know where it's coming from. And I don't mean confidence in a negative. It's almost false confidence that, oh my gosh, I mean, what you did in the military, they're going to be lining up at your door when you get ready. When you hand in your papers, you're going to have more job offers. I hear that a lot from folks getting ready to separate or retire when they say, okay, where are those calls? I thought everybody was going to be like falling all over themselves for me. And I don't know where that message is coming from, but understand it's a very different culture. You are going from one culture where you understood what to do, you were trained for it, right? And that's a big part of it. When somebody enters the military at 18, 19, 20 years old, which is typical, they are trained for the work that they are going to be asked to do, because you don't come out of high school knowing how to do this. Well, there's training that's required for this new career as well. And so understanding that that training is required is critical to not making some of the mistakes. We understand that there's different language in the military. There's different communication styles in the military. There's a different mission and purpose in the military. Civilians understand that, but sometimes the mistake happens when somebody coming out of the military doesn't know that the differences are also going to be on the civilian side. Let's face it, we were all civilians before you made the choice to go into the military, because the military chooses candidates from the same job pool, right? Civilians. But we forget sometimes, or you forget sometimes, when you're going back into the civilian sector, that it's going to feel different. So that's sometimes where those mistakes can happen. And that's why I've seen a lot of folks grab really tight onto resumes. I had a coaching call yesterday with a gentleman whose background is mind-blowing. I mean, I am probably guilty of saying, wow, they're going to line up for you, because his background is unbelievable. But there were many times where I said to him, based on who he was going to be sending this resume to, are they going to understand what these terms mean? Even the two little case, D, do they understand that means second? Because that's not how civilians write. And so we had to go through with a fine-tooth comb to really pull out the civilian speak, not to demilitarize the resume, but really pull out what a civilian hiring manager is going to look for.
I love that. And the confidence piece is one I'm still trying to get my head around. And I view it almost through a lens, and this is probably a little bit too negative, but it's almost entitlement. And I feel like the biggest disservice we do to the members of our military is I have heard that narrative. When I was in, I heard that narrative. Hey, your country owes you a great deal. You're going to be hired right away. People are lining up. People want to hire you. You're going to have no problem. And the problem with that is that, at least in the 90% or plus of the interviews I've conducted, it's not the case. It requires a lot of soul searching. It requires a lot of proactive reaching out to people. It requires coffee chats. It requires networking. It requires applying to 100 jobs to get 5 or 10 interviews. And what I wish for listeners is if we could shift the narrative to assume that it's going to be a challenge. I'd rather have you be pleasantly surprised to find it easier than that. But I feel like that confidence piece, I really like the way you put it, because I think that sometimes we prop members of the military up to expect something that doesn't actually happen, and then they're left either running out of money or running out of confidence because they think, what's wrong with me that I'm not just being handed a job, which I can honestly say in 260 plus interviews, I've never heard that happening. I've never heard someone just out of the blue getting a job for their job offer for their dream job.
Well, and I think there's something in between being overly confident and having no confidence, right? And that is having a strategy. And that's honestly where personal branding comes in. Because if you think about it, not getting a job or not having people fall all over you isn't necessarily because you're not a good candidate. It's maybe because you haven't positioned yourself well, or you're making it too complicated, like the gentleman I spoke to yesterday. His resume is amazing. His skill set's amazing. So, there are a lot of amazing people out there. It's about putting that amazingness into a story or narrative that hiring manager who says, gosh, I'm really looking for someone who's got these skills and is amazing, can say, oh, well, there you are, right? But we don't think about connecting those dots. Resumes are a necessary part of the process, but they're reviewed in 6 to 8 seconds, max. Hiring managers are getting 250 resumes for every open position. do the math. If your resume doesn't speak and tell a story that they find interesting, that they can confirm when they look on LinkedIn and through the networking contacts you have, if all of that isn't buttoned up and really compelling, they go to the next one. So there's so much opportunity to be more proactive, as you mentioned earlier, and to button up all those touch points. And the onus is on the veteran. It is. It's on the veteran. It's on any individual who wants to be recognized and valued for what they bring to the table. That's always on the individual. And that's also where the hard part starts.
I love that. And we'll get into personal branding in just a second. But I think of the business school case. It's a very popular case, but it's about, pre-Blu-ray and DVD, there was VHS and there was Beta. And Beta was the superior technology. It was in every way the better product. And VHS won out. And one of the critical components and reasons why was because of their marketing and advertising. That made the difference. And so what I hear when Lida's talking about this is packaging matters. Being able to explain your background matters. Being able to speak about yourself and your value matters. And I think that one of the reasons it matters is it's hard. It takes time. We'll talk about this in a second, but it takes time and energy. It takes being honest. It takes being vulnerable to uncover who you are, what you're about, what you want, all of those things. But my thesis for listeners is the people who take the time to do that, to be able to figure that out, and they spend all of that energy to figure that out, they're going to be more successful because they can better sell themselves or present themselves, however you want to position it. They're better able to speak to what they want and who they are, which makes it easier. People are lazy. Do the work for me. Don't expect me to do the heavy lifting for you. So maybe on that, could you talk about, we've already touched on it already, but could you just kind of share what you mean by personal brand and anything you could walk us through so that listeners get a sense of how they might at least start the process of discovering and refining their own personal brand?
Sure. And so as we have talked about, a brand is a feeling. It's an expectation of an experience. I believe if I go to lunch with Justin, I'm going to have a certain experience. And if that experience is confirmed, awesome. I now solidify my beliefs in what you stand for, what you can offer, what your value is. If it's not confirmed, I might give you a second shot, but that's sometimes rare. So it's an expectation of an experience. We also say sometimes brand is reputation. What do other people say about you? So in a nutshell, that's really what brand is. It's not about being fake. It's not about spin. It's not even about selling yourself as much as it is telling your narrative, your story in a way that other people, and I'll get to that in a second, who those other people are, but that other people will find relevant and compelling. So the steps to building a personal brand, I share this in my programs all the time. It's not rocket science. And they love that joke at Lockheed, but it's not rocket science. It's a very simple process, but it's not an easy process. And I admit, before I do any workshop, no matter who's in my audience, I'm going to move you out of your comfort zone, and it will feel awkward. It will feel uncomfortable. It will push your tolerance. But again, going back to what we said earlier, you have to be an expert on you. I can't tell you what you should stand for and how you should promote yourself until you uncover these things. So it really does start fundamentally with heavy lifting. And the heavy lifting is, who are you? Who are you? And what does that look like for you? Each one of us has a set of values. And we talk a lot about values in personal branding because your values are what you use as sort of a moral filter, right? To make decisions. This feels right. This feels wrong. This person I can trust. This person I can't trust. And values establish credibility. Then we take an assessment of what your current reputation is. And as we talked about, everybody has a personal brand. But do you know what it is? I mean, do you really know what it is? And have you thought about the experience other people have when they work with you or serve with you or are led by you? What does that current brand really mean? Then we match it against what you want to be known for. And that's really where the control comes in. And that's where the uncomfortable part really starts. Because I give you permission through this process to design the legacy you want for yourself. And that legacy is the feeling other people will have of you And we use an exercise where we go to the end of your life, which gets everybody warm and fuzzy. But it's really kind of saying, at the end of your life, what do you want this all to mean? Because we're all in a finite experience here. It's not, we don't get many do-overs. So what do you want people to remember you for? What is that experience they will say, gosh, I remember that time that Justin did this for me, or he always made me feel X, right? That's what people want at the end of their life. It's not as much about moving P&L or, taking a company public as much as it is the experience that other people had. So we go through exercises to really understand what that's going to look like for you. And once you've crystallized that, even if you stopped right there, you've given yourself more control over your future than you've ever had in the past, because it becomes a filter. You're able to use that desired personal brand as a guide for, this job feels right, that job doesn't. These people I want to hang out with. Those people, they're not going to get me to that legacy I'm building. So it becomes, all of a sudden you start feeling a guiding force there. Then we have to talk about who this all matters to. Right.
Let me just pause you here because there's so much here I want to call out. So
okay.
Remember where you are. No, this is great. This is great. So I love where you started with this, and you started with, this is, well, first of all, I love that you're saying it's a simple process, but it's not easy. Right. And you talked about you're going to take people out of their comfort zone. And for longtime listeners, you know that I'm a big fan of, some people call it the zone of proximal development. They talk about the fringe of your ability, where you're a little bit comfortable, but not completely comfortable. They consider that the area of highest professional growth. And I also firmly believe that everything great that has happened in my life, almost all of it has come when I'm out of my comfort zone, when I take a risk or a chance, where I speak up when it's not comfortable. Very few things, when we're in the warm jacuzzi of feeling good and just relaxed, very few great things come from that. And so I just want to spotlight what Lida's talking about. This is not for the faint of heart. It's not complex, but it is far from easy. And I think of for those of you who listen to my recent episode about my own career change, I love what she's talking about of trusting your body, making decisions from that gut feel, trusting your instincts. If you start to do the work of figuring out what you believe in, then you can start to respond in what aligns with that or what doesn't. And for my own career path, that was saying, hey, I want more autonomy. It may not feel comfortable. It might feel like a risk, but this feels like the right direction for me and my family. And then one last thing that I'll say, because I love that exercise that you're saying of at the end of your life, like what a great framework. At the end of your life, what is the words that people are going to say at your funeral? And as you were saying that, it made me think like, oh, I think one of the ones for me is I really, a goal for me is I really want to be present. I want to be with whoever I'm with. I want to be fully present. I want them to feel like I'm seeing them, that I'm hearing them, that I'm 100% focused on them. And then I thought, man, 2 days ago, my 6 and my 3-year-old nieces were over. They were, here for 2 hours. How much of that 2 hours was I on my phone? Like, how much of it was I not being present? And I think that some of the discomfort that Lida's talking about is it's like, that's where the work begins of like, okay, there's a discrepancy between what I claim I want to be and the actuality of how I am. I'm not actually being as present as I want. But the great thing is I can start to do the deep work of starting to change that. Hey, the next time I'm with my nieces, can I really show up? Can I really be present? Can I put my phone away? Because that's who I want to be. That's the man that I want to become. And so I sorry to just derail you, but there is so much that you were saying that's good that I wanted to just call out.
Well, and as you point out, awareness is the first step, right? So, the next time when you catch yourself on your phone, you'll have the inertia to be able to put it away because you've got a path now. You've got a direction. You've got a vision of what you want ultimately. And the beauty of personal branding is it's not about perfection. It's not about, being spotless and 100% perfect, but it is about consistency. So if I know that about you, if I know that your goal is to be present and that's how you want me to perceive you as part of the value set, then I might even hold you accountable to that and say, okay, so you're taking calls during our conversation. How is that really consistent? And you'll be like, wow, okay, thanks for that. But that's what our audience gets to do too. And your audience really is who this all matters to. And the hard part and the good part about target audiences, it's not everyone out there. As a speaker and a consultant, I initially thought everybody was a potential target, audience for me. And that wasn't true, because there are some people who don't like my message or find it too rah-rah or too hard or whatever. Fine, let's move those people out of the way and let my target audience come forward. Because there are so many people out there who love what I talk about, have done the work and found the results. Those are the people I want more of. But you've got to figure out who your target audience is. And once you're comfortable understanding it's not everybody, then you drill down into who those people really are, because it's your choir, right? It's the people who go, I get it. I totally get it. I want more. And here, I'll write you a check and give you more, right? I want more. But you have to understand who those people are. And that's a process in and of itself. So personal branding is about you, but it's also about them. And being okay saying, those people aren't my target audience. I'm just going to kind of scoosh them off to the side. Apple's very clear on who their target audience is. And it's not everyone who wants a smartphone or everyone who wants a computer. There's a tribe of people who love what Apple stands for. That's who they sell to. They don't sell to people who are diehard PC users, right? So getting really clear on that, that's the foundation of personal branding. Then we use those assets and we organize them to create a strategy. So if you want to be known as someone who's present, and I'm sure there are other qualities as well that you want to be known for, how do you put that into a strategy that you can live and work every single day? There are touch points, there are tactics that go into that strategy. Tools like social networking, elevator pitch, narrative, how you dress, how your body language communicates that, the relationships you have, the way that you communicate and behave. All of those are the tactics that we use to create personal brand. But the heavy lifting comes first, and that's usually where my audiences are looking at me like they've just been through the dryer, and they're tousled and exhausted. And I get that. Like you said, it's hard work. But the fun comes when we start looking at LinkedIn profiles and we start looking at networking strategies and elevator pitches and all these tools that we're using on a daily basis, but we never thought about bolting them into a strategy that was more intentional and focused. And it feels like a little bit of hard work at the beginning. I admit that. But what I've heard back from everyone who's been through my program is it becomes so much easier to be yourself because you're focused. You're making decisions that are right for you and not worrying as much about pleasing people who are not your target audience. And so while it might feel a little hard at the beginning, it becomes so much easier to be you. And the opportunities that you attract confirm that you're on the right path.
This is great. And so a couple things that stood out to me, that whole thought of knowing your audience, it's so tough to do that. At least for me, it's so tough to, in an entrepreneur standpoint, I was least successful when I wanted everyone to be my customer. Right. I was most successful when I was saying no to people who were not the right customer for me. And I think that I think on a personal level, this is really hard to do in an environment where there's likes on Facebook. Like everything is quantifiable. Like how many people really like me or my message. And I love I find it liberating when you're talking about, man, if you really know, I worked with an executive coach who called it, who's on the boat and who's off the boat, like in making a decision, whose opinions matter, my wife's, my family's, my close friends. Great. Everyone else, they're off the boat. Who cares? And it does give you that sense of liberation to not be worrying about pleasing everyone. And for listeners, I'll add this in the show notes. I did an episode a while back with Dr. Robert Glover. He wrote a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy. It's a book that really resonated with me, but a lot of that was a good portion of us, myself included, who want to be people pleasers. We want everyone to like us, and that leads to a lot of detrimental things. So that's a good one to check out. And then last thing I'll say is I love what Lida's saying about strategy. And I think that what's great about this, the elevator pitch, the narrative of ways to communicate, behave, I think that, most veterans I know are great at tactics. If you give someone, an objective, they will break through walls and do it better than anyone else I know. And maybe because I never became a flag rank, maybe I would have been better at strategy. Oftentimes I'm spinning my wheels, making sure I know what I'm going after. And so what I love about this is if you do this work that Lida is talking about and you do that foundation, that sets you up for your kill zone. That sets you up for where you're going to thrive, which is then tackling on LinkedIn, tacking on networking, doing these tactical things that I think any listener is going to really excel at if they've done the heavy lifting of that foundation.
Well, and that's really when I wrote Your Next Mission, which was simply capturing all of this learning and all of these tools and putting it into a format where you could do the exercises in real time. I structured the book that way. I structured it so that you're answering all these really hard questions at the beginning. And then when we get to social media or how to write your elevator pitch, you're referring to them. People have said to me, can I just skip around? No, it's sequential for a reason. And that's how personal branding works. So it does feel really hard at the beginning, but it just makes it so much easier. And as you said, you're able to quickly identify a potential client without having to go through all the exercises of sort of doing that pre-interview dance, because they either fit or they don't.
Yep.
And, and I look for easy. It's always about easy for me. So that's a part of it.
I love that. I think that's really fantastic. Do you have any thoughts for when it comes to, so let's say that, and for listeners in the show notes, I'll add links to some of Lida's videos on LinkedIn. And I believe you have one that's about branding and specifically about personal brand. Is that right?
I have one specific to military, which is translating your military into civilian. But then I also have courses on creating a personal brand, repairing your brand. There's a total of 8. And what's really helpful for veterans too is a course I did for college grads. It's all about job hunting. And we know that a lot of veterans go to post-education after military. But even just some of the tips that I shared in that course, I've referred a lot of veterans to too.
That's great. And so for listeners, I'm going to add links to all of those things in the show notes at beyondtheuniform.org. But let's talk about, let's talk first about any thoughts you have about leveraging one's personal brand online. And I'm imagining LinkedIn is a big component of that, but anything specific to presenting oneself in the digital environment?
Yeah, first and fundamentally, I say nothing online is private. So I think we all feel that, but then we have these privacy settings, which we think give us all the security. I'm here to tell you they don't. I have sat with hiring managers who have walked around privacy settings on Facebook and all with no problem, and they've done it legally and ethically. So if you post it into an online forum, or you type it into an email, or you take a picture of it and you send it to someone, you've made that information public, and just assume that. So ask yourself before you send that joke or you make that comment or you tag somebody or are tagged in something, does this represent the me that I'm working towards, right? Does this represent me as somebody that I'm striving to build a legacy around? And if it doesn't, walk down the hall and tell somebody that joke. Don't post it, don't type it, don't email it. And always ask yourself, how can I position myself strategically to get the attention of the people that I want in a way that's meaningful? So here's an example. On LinkedIn, a lot of times people will share links to articles or a book or a speech that they find helpful, but they don't tell me why they're sharing it. So I think it's great that I get the information, but I haven't learned anything about you. And do you agree with the author? Do you disagree with the author? Do you have something to add to what the author of that article commented on? That's when I start learning about you, is not just when you become an aggregator for great information, but you're sharing your position on that.
I love that too. I used to get really pissed off when people that worked for me would just forward an email without anything. And it's like, okay, I got to look through this email. Like, tell me, why does this matter? But what you're talking about is like, that's a great exercise of revealing, like, hey, if I post something on LinkedIn or share something, add that flavor in, let people know why it matters to me. That's letting them learn about me as much as it is about whatever I'm sharing. That's a really, really great and simple tactical tool.
Exactly. And the second point would be to think about consistency, right? So we know that with Instagram, and I am not good at this on Instagram, but we know with Instagram, it's all supposed to have a look and a feel, right? If you use a certain filter, it's all supposed to, that applies on LinkedIn and Facebook and any other platforms that you're in, not necessarily the filters and the screens that you're using, but all of your articles, all of your posts, all of your tags should tell me something consistent about who you are. Now, in my case, I have a challenge because I post about corporate professional development and I post about military. And I've constantly had to teeter-totter to make sure that my brand represents both and that it isn't too heavy military or too heavy corporate. But for most of you, you're going to be dealing with, I'm trying to let people know that maybe I was a mechanic in the Navy, but I want to be in project management in my next career. So you're going to be telling a narrative around that. Consistently tell that narrative. People's attention span is very, very short, right? And it's okay to be repetitive. It's okay to repeat that narrative as you're posting articles, as you're commenting, as you're sharing information and building relationships online. Make sure it's consistent over time. That's really what is getting the most success.
That really resonates with me because I get in this mindset where I want everything to be original and authentic versus some of the most successful people I see, they have, if you look at like the Gary Vaynerchuk's or even Tony Robbins, like they have their shtick, they have their talk track, and you see them in different environments. They're communicating the same message. Right. And one, it does take repetition to remember anything, but it's also like that's their brand that they're reinforcing, and so to not shy away from that. I think that's definitely something I'm taking away from that. That's great to hear.
Well, and something else you just reminded me that I would layer on top is maybe ask yourself before you post something or before you stand up a website or do whatever, what do I want my audience to, I always say it's the rule of three, know, feel, and do. So what do I want them to know about me? Do I want them to know that I'm changing careers? Do I want them to know that I'm ready for work as of 1 August? What do I want them to know about me? And therefore, how does my post fit into that? Second, what do I want them to feel about me? Do I want them to feel that I'm excited and passionate about this industry, that I'm open to new ideas, and that reflects my lifelong learning? So the feel piece is really important. But the part we always forget is the last one, which is what do I want them to do? Do I want them to click on this link? Do I want them to send me their ideas? Do I want my audience to call me or reach out to me? Call to action is marketing 101, and we forget that in social media. So I think, sprinkling those three pieces into posts creates a higher result, assuming you're working off of a strategy, right? I'm looking for a job. I'm trying to build my business. I'm trying to build my position in this market, whatever the strategy is. What do I want my audience to know? What do I want them to feel? And what do I want them to do? Just adding that layer to social media engagement creates much different results.
That's great. I'm going to take that on as well. I think that so often I'm not terribly active on social media, but when I am, it's almost all knee-jerk. It's I have this idea, I have this thought, let me get this out there. And you're proposing an extra layer of filter that I love. I love this thought of intention, like what is the intention behind any action? And I love that framework of know, feel, and do. And again, if you've done the heavy lifting that Lida's talking about, if you know your personal brand, it's easier to see how it fits into that filter. It's easier to see how that aligns. And you had said it earlier, I think I had written it down, but it's that thought of you had said it, I had written it down somewhere, but it's like that thought of like, does this text or email reflect who the person I want to be, the person that I'm becoming? I think that's beautiful because it's easy to lose sight of that, but just to reinforce that and make sure that everything's headed in the right direction, everything's consistently moving towards the person that we aspire to be and that we want to project to the world.
And that's authentic, right? Because it's not about, again, it's not about spin or trying to make you into somebody you're not. But I might have goals of being seen a certain way, and I work on that every single day, and I live those values, and it's very clear that that's where I'm moving and I can actually attain that. Then I'm going to ask myself every time I post, does this get me closer to that, or could somebody take it the wrong way? And there's a lot of filters we need to apply to social media. And that's not to say that if somebody's brand is around advocacy and political out there-ness, that they aren't posting things that I wouldn't post. But that's their strategy. It's not my strategy.
That's great. That's great. I know that we're getting short on time. Let's say... one of the things I had written down was just because we're talking so much about brand. Let's say that someone is in a job they don't like, and that could be the military, right? And I'm just wondering, especially coming from the military, we pride ourselves on commitment and sticking through things. And does quitting hurt their personal brand, or how should that affect their decision?
And that's not even just a military question. That's an everyone question, right? Because sometimes we do make the wrong choice, or the situation changes and it's not the job we wanted or thought we were getting or that we started with. Being thoughtful about quitting a job, it should be thoughtful. You should think about it. Nobody appreciates the person who storms off in a huff of expletives and, gets online and tweets about it. That's career suicide. So if it's your career and if it's your job, ask yourself first and foremost, is the reason I'm quitting because of something that changed? Is it because I didn't read the situation right, or something in me changed? Also ask yourself if it's fixable. Right? Because sometimes the situation changed, and we see this a lot in the first 1 to 3 years after somebody has left the military. They'll take a job, realize it wasn't what they wanted, and just kind of quietly go out the back door. And employers are so frustrated by this because maybe it was fixable. Maybe you didn't like your manager, but we could easily have assigned you to another manager, or you didn't have the tools. Well, we easily have ways of training you up on that. So ask yourself, is the situation fixable? Is the timing right to make a change, right? If you've been in a job for 3 months, is it the right time to move? Could you hang out there for another 6 months and at least have 9 months on your resume? If it isn't and you have to leave, then you have to leave. But look at the timing. If you've been in a job for 15 years, you're probably okay making a move. But look at the timing, because resume optics do matter. And hiring managers will look at a lot of short-term jobs potentially as a negative. So could you hang out for another 6 months, 9 months, a year, and at least get some, could it look better on your resume? And ask yourself if you've done everything. And the folks that I've coached or spoken with will often admit that maybe they didn't reach out for help. Maybe they weren't clear on what was expected of them. Maybe they didn't bring their full self to work, right? Maybe they took the job because, it calmed the family down and it was the first job out of the military. And honestly, they weren't in. They weren't 100% in. So are there things you could do differently? And that's a great learning. And if you learn that and you quit a job and your brand builds because you take those learnings and use them more effectively in your next job, that's a win. Nobody likes to see turnover. Employers don't, and we certainly don't as employees sometimes, because that means there's stress. So could it hurt your reputation? I think if you're reckless about it, especially if you go online and you start posting about it, those are ways to hurt your reputation. But we all understand that sometimes jobs just don't work out. The other piece is have a good story or narrative to explain why it didn't work out. Your next employer is going to want to know. They're going to ask you, what happened in your last job. Be careful bad-mouthing other companies. It's kind of like when you're dating and the the guy or gal you're dating talks negatively about their ex, you're wondering, are they going to talk that way about me? Mm-hmm. Employers wonder about that too, right? And if you have a way of explaining what happened that positively reflects on the employer, positively reflects on what you've learned, that's a good brand building tool. So there's ways to sabotage it and definitely ways to increase credibility and reputation if you have to make a job change.
This is great. Well, I know that we're towards the end of our time. We've only gotten through half the questions, but there's so much information here. And I want to say for listeners, I'm committing, and I hope you will join me in this. I'm going to watch the videos that Lida has about rebranding or branding. I think that this is like very relevant for me, and I'm 10 years out of the military. I think that throughout one's career, I imagine it is a continuous process of discovering one's values and what's changed. So I'm going to commit to watching those. I invite you to do the same and to also check out her book, Your Next Mission. But Lida, I always like to leave the last question open-ended, which is, what have we not covered that you want to share with listeners, or what is it that you want to leave with people before we wrap up?
The response I always have to that question is recognize that your transition is your transition. It's not the person sitting next to you. And if they look like they're doing great and they've got a job and everybody's happy and there's bunnies and unicorns dancing around them, maybe not. Your transition is yours, and it will be a process that is unique to you. And so give yourself patience. Give yourself the tools that you need to be successful, but be patient with yourself. It's your experience, and it's exactly the experience you're supposed to have. The other part of that is don't hesitate to ask for help. Civilians were very comfortable asking for help. We go to resources all over the place, in person, online, in paperback and hardback edition. Use that skill set and ask for help. Reach out, talk to people, create a community around you that could mirror and mimic what you had in the military. We know that you're gonna have trouble with that sense of camaraderie that you're leaving behind that may not replicate right away. You can replicate that. Find people who will help you in this process of building your brand, being intentional and focused, and can give you those career skills that you need to be successful. Nothing wrong with asking for help. It's actually a sign of strength.
I love it. And I love that thought that everyone's career transition is unique. And I would even extend that obviously to your career is unique. The things that you want to do with your life and career are yours. And it's so easy to look at the Instagram images and think that everything is going great for everyone else, and just stay in your lane, focus on your own journey. And then I love that thought too of being okay asking for help. And I can see why asking for help in many situations in the military could be a liability. And not always, but I can see that being the case. But it definitely is an asset. There's so many people who want to help you. There's so many organizations out there who are specifically designed to help you in whatever you need. So being willing to shoot up a flare and ask for help, ask for advice, get coffee with someone, learn from them. It's a way to accelerate your own learning through mentorship, advisors, things like that. Lida, thank you so much for the work that you do, and I will include in the show notes links to some of her articles and videos, her books, her organization. I've learned a ton. I know our listeners will as well, and appreciate your taking the time to speak with us.
Well, my pleasure. Love the podcast, love what you're doing, and thank you for your service as well, Justin.
Thank you. Thank you.
Surface.
Well, thank you so much for listening and for supporting Beyond the Uniform. Beyond the Uniform is produced and edited by me, Justin Nassiri. Our staff is entirely part-time. They do this on nights and weekends out of the goodness of their hearts to give back to the military community. Our director of outreach is Steve Bain, who relentlessly books guests, finds sponsors, puts together our newsletter, and thousands of other critical tasks every single week, all behind the scenes to keep Beyond the Uniform running smoothly. Our editor is Kathleen Dillon, who listens to and transcribes every single episode to help out those who don't have the time to listen to the show. It has a major impact on our site's SEO value, which helps people find us through Google. Our data analytics and insights advisor is Andrew Woolridge, who pores over the data each and every month to help us better understand how to best serve the Beyond the Uniform audience. Our digital production work is done by Michael Cummings, who puts together custom artwork for every episode. If you're enjoying Beyond the Uniform, the best way to help us out is by telling your friends and fellow service members and veterans. iTunes reviews, believe it or not, have a big impact on getting the word out as well. So if you have a chance to leave a positive review, that is greatly appreciated. If you know of a business that would like to get their product or service in front of a military audience, we are always on the lookout for sponsors, which helps us subsidize the cost of putting this show together. And if you haven't yet signed up for our newsletter, you can do so at beyondtheuniform.io. We send out a newsletter twice a month, and it is a treasure trove of helpful information for your civilian career and transition. And be sure to check out our coaching program, where you can be connected with a subsidized, professional, certified executive and career coach to help you in your career decision making. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back next week with more stories from military veterans about their civilian career. Take care.